the sales brochure that when the railroad came in, they were trying to establish all the towns on Highway 17. So that was Moffett, Hooper, Mosca. I don't know if Villa Grove was on there. Crestone might have been in there. But it was the sales pitch, and it was pitching this Eden where the crops watered themselves and the clean air. And I think there was something about like no respiratory disease. I mean, there was some stuff that they were really, must have been really important back then as far as what they were trying to convince people to move here to do. I mean, there was they had a cookie cutter template where they were trying to do this whole land speculation thing where they were going to develop this valley. And I think it had varying levels of success. I know the sheep herds exploded. The railroad moved thousands, millions of sheep. That was the initial land speculation plan, and then it just went away. And it's crazy to me how quickly that happened. But
I'm Rob Jones, grew up in this house. I've been farming pretty much the whole time other than 4 years of college.
I'm Michael Jones, and I'm his son. So my great-great-grandpa moved to Hooper to be the town doctor, and that was early 1900s. And so that makes me generation number 4, and him generation number 3.
Then his son, Cuvier, started farming. There were all kinds of farms that were in various forms of bankruptcy and just abandonment, whatever, because of the times. And he ended up with the quarter south of here, and that's where he raised his 3 sons. They would get ditch water usually till August when they divert water out of the river and come down the High Line, which splits these 2 quarters. No sprinklers. My dad finally got drug kicking and screaming to put sprinklers in.
And that was 1979 that the sprinklers came in, and that was kind of where these went from small, pretty diverse farms as far as a few cows, a few sheep, chickens, turkeys, and they moved 2 big monocrop circles. And the other thing he kind of glossed over there was the big influence on those early farms were the wars. His grandpa, he shipped his sons off to the war, and then at that time he ramped up and scaled this farm as much as he could for the war effort. And just that mindset as far as I have to produce as much as I can for the country was just a different mindset than we have now. But the other part of that I love is the water component is just very interesting, and everyone's family history kind of follows that, where there were flood irrigated fields and you kind of watered as well as you could. I mean, it was just a ton of work. It was really hard to do flood irrigation, not as productive. Sprinklers came in, the productivity went up, and that was great. The worst part was it just took our water table. So my grandpa's mom, she came here to be the teacher at the Hooper School, and she got off the train and said she would have left immediately if there was another train that day, but she ended up staying. But just kind of what a big central thing that was for all the towns, and then it just went away. So it's just kind of interesting how things change and happen like that.
I'm Ray Newmeyer, and I first got acquainted with Hooper in the late 40s. My grandmother lived in Hooper and would come from the country out there on the farm and come in and visit my grandmother. They started building houses and stuff because this was one of the prime farming areas in the late 1800s. And, they could raise wheat, and there were cattle ranches to the east. So there were a lot of cattle and cowboys and farmers and more an ag community, and they brought the railroad in to haul the cattle and the flour grains out of Hooper. So it was the narrow gauge. And I remember in about 1950, the railroad was still running, and it wasn't taken out until a few years later when they just didn't have any freight to haul because the farming was really diminished then. That's when the high salts came up in the soil and killed the farming. But I do remember the stockyards and the lumber yards, and one time Hooper had 2 flour mills, they had 2 banks, a lot of the houses, it was pretty much full of houses. You can still find the foundations of some of them on the vacant lots. And they moved the houses, most of them to Center, because that's where the farming had moved to. So that was in the, I think somewhere in the 20s, 30s. That's what I remember my grandmother saying, so.
The career of farming, it's one of those like, yeah, it's not always fun. It's definitely not easy. And it's one that you just kind of take a step back at some point. It's like, yeah, we've accomplished something this year.